Did you know this?
Another group of angels specifically identified as the seraphim. In the Hebrew language, seraphim means burning ones. The book of Isaiah tells us of the seraphim. The book of Isaiah is a fascinating one to study. For starters, the records of Isaiah's prophecy are among the most well-documented of all the Old Testament books. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1948 and featured a copy of the book dated from 100 BC, which was over 1,000 years older than the next oldest copy, which dated from 900 AD. At the time, translation work on the Revised Standard Version of the Bible was being completed, but the work was stopped while these documents were checked, but very little needed changing. In the latter half of Israel's kingdom period, Isaiah lived in Jerusalem and spoke on God's behalf to the leaders of Jerusalem and Judah. He expressed first of all a message of God's judgment. He admonished Israel's corrupt leaders that the rebellion against their covenant with God would come at a cost, that God was going to use the great empires of Assyria and after them, Babylon, to judge Jerusalem if they continued in idolatry and tyranny of the poor, but that declaration was incorporated with a message of hope. Isaiah's grand vision of God sitting on his throne in the temple, surrounded by heavenly creatures shouting, "God is holy, holy, holy," and Isaiah suddenly sees how corrupt he and his people Israel are, and he thinks he'll be destroyed by God's holiness, but he isn't. Then one of the seraphim flew and burns him, but not to destroy, but rather to purify him from sin. And as Isaiah mulls over this peculiar experience, God assigns him a tough task. He is to keep preaching the coming judgment. But because Israel has reached a point of no return, his warnings will paradoxically harden the people. So the hardening impact of the Word of God is a key theme, and it is no wonder that Isaiah asked, "How long do I have to go on preaching and hardening them with no response?" Isaiah had one of the toughest assignments of all the prophets, but of course, if he hadn't gone through with it, we wouldn't have this amazing book. And he didn't know that centuries ahead, this book would be an inspiration. But in his lifetime, he was a failure. Nobody listened. They just got harder and harder for 40 years. In the year the king Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory." At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. "Woe to me," I cried, "I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty."